Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. Thank you for joining us today for this timely and crucial discussion on the regional response to Venezuela's presidential election. I'm Jason Marzek, Vice President and Senior Director of the Atlantic Council's Adrian Arch Latin America Center, and I'm delighted to be joined today by Francisco Mora, the U.S. Ambassador to the Organization of American States, who I will introduce more formally in a moment. Here at the Atlantic Council, we continue to monitor developments in Venezuela following the July 28th presidential election, which, according to voter tally sheets presented by the opposition, show that Edmundo Gonzalez won by more than twice as many votes as Nicolas Maduro. As things stand, the U.S. has joined with key allies in the region in recognizing this, and many other countries across the globe have called for transparency and independent verification of the vote tallies announced by the Maduro-controlled National Electoral Council. In the aftermath of the election, regional countries called an emergency meeting of the Organization of American States last week and to show a solidarity with the Venezuelan people. I spoke with Paraguay's Foreign Minister Ruben Ramirez this past Wednesday, hours before the OAS meeting. While a resolution condemning the electoral fraud failed to pass, it is worth noting that not a single regional government voted against it. Meanwhile, there's still opportunities for negotiations to facilitate a peaceful democratic transition. Aligning incentives to advance this transition will not be easy, but it's crucial that Venezuela's desire for change is respected. At the Adrian Arch Latin America Center, we have been deeply committed to supporting a return to democracy in Venezuela for many years. Our goal has been and will continue to be supporting the restoration of Venezuelans' fundamental right to elect their own leaders. As we continue to push for regional coordination on international efforts to support the Venezuelan people, I'm pleased again to be joined today by Ambassador Francisco Mora, who serves as the U.S. Ambassador to the Organization of American States, and on top of that is a tireless champion for the Venezuelan people. Prior to his current role, he served as Professor of International Relations at Florida International University's Gordon Institute. I also want to mention that the Gordon Institute has continued to be a valuable partner of the Adrian Arch Latin America Center over the years, including in the lead up to and following the election through our Venezuela scenario planning work together. Ambassador Mora also previously served as Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for the Western Hemisphere and also served as a consultant for the Institute for National Security Studies, State Department, U.S. Southern Command, and other efforts. So Ambassador Mora, again, welcome. Thank you for joining us so much today. I want to begin by asking you how you're seeing things in Venezuela today, August 8th. Maria Corina Machado and others have expressed that the Maduro regime is at its weakest point, and this comes amid thousands of protesters being detained and dozens of people who have lost their lives to freedom in the last less than 2 weeks. So how are you seeing things today before we go into your efforts at the OAS?
Well, first of all, Jason, thank you for the opportunity. It's always great to be with the Atlantic Council. In terms of the situation as of today, what I think we've seen is the sort of deepening of the human rights situation in Venezuela. The detentions, the repressions, the acts of violence by the state and the apparatus of the state demonstrates or shows that at the moment, Maduro and his representatives are not quite interested in respecting the will of the Venezuelan people. And I think it's incumbent upon us, and when I say us, I mean the international community, the OAS member, and to continue paying attention, to continue pressuring, to continue finding ways to ensure that what the Venezuelan people did on election day is respected and that we move towards a transition. The OAS has a role, but there are other parallel processes of negotiation and dialogue that need to move in that direction. I think the end goal should be a common one, but it's clear, and I'll end with this, that Edmundo Gonzalez won the election. And the results and the tallies, I think, show that. It's up to us to continue supporting that effort. And it's up to the Venezuelan people to continue struggling and fighting for their democracy.
Now, Ambassador, along those lines, last week, the speed with which the resolution was put forward to call for transparency in the OAS vote count and the vote count at the OAS. It was impressive the degree to which the OAS moved so quickly. The call for that was on Monday. The emergency meeting was on Wednesday. How was that quick action achieved?
Well, there was outrage and a lot of concern among a number of member states that what had happened in Venezuela on Sunday and on Monday was unacceptable, and that the OAS, the premier multilateral forum of the hemisphere, needed to make a statement and needed to pronounce itself. And not just the Secretary General, and I think what he said and the work he does is important, and not just the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights, which also issued some reports and press releases. That's all good. But it's the permanent council, the member states, who needed to express and, as I said, make clear that there were strong problems with issues with the election. You're right. The OAS usually does not act that quickly. This is a multilateral forum with 34 member states. It's hard to move, but we did. And so we had a long negotiation on Wednesday morning and then further negotiations in the afternoon before we came to the permanent council. There were many member states, particularly CARICOM, who had not received instructions and had not consulted or received instructions for capital. So that kept them from voting, which is one of the reasons why they abstained. Other member states wanted a stronger resolution with stronger language. In the end, because it was somewhat rushed and all these other dynamics going on, we were only able to get 17. We needed 18 votes. But as you said, no state rejected or voted against the resolution. They either abstained or were not present. And I can tell you that we are now working on a process that hopefully will lead next week to another special meeting on Venezuela, where we could work towards a resolution. That is work in progress. Now we have the time to negotiate. We have the time for diplomacy now. We're going to give it that time so that we can revisit this issue next week.
And Ambassador, let me follow up on the fact that not a single country voted against the resolution. I mean, that's pretty remarkable. Obviously, the resolution you mentioned didn't pass, but what do you make of the fact, especially with very differing perspectives across member states, that not a single country voted against the resolution last week?
You know, I think there was something of a recognition that there was, at a minimum, Jason, a disputed election. There were issues that occurred on Sunday and Monday that were not clear, that were not transparent. That's the word that I wanted to use. And I don't think states wanted to make any judgments at that point, one way or the other. Some abstained because they didn't have as I said, the instructions. But as I said, a lot is, things are much clearer now. And this, I think, a future resolution will have to include more language with respect to the issue of human rights or the situation of human rights. So we hope that that will be included in this next resolution, and I hope that we can get there. But we certainly have the time now. And hopefully what we can do is reach a consensus document. Jason, as you know, at the OAS, everything or most of the things we do by consensus. 34 member states, that's never easy, right?
Right.
And our goal is to reach that consensus. If we have another opportunity here next week to adopt a resolution, we will work very much towards a consensus document. And I hope we won't have to vote, but if necessary, we'll have to.
And Ambassador, if you could give a little further details, you mentioned the importance of including human rights into a potential follow-on resolution. Are there certain aspects of that resolution, particularly pertaining to human rights, that you would optimally like to see included?
So, you know, as you know, there's been over 2,000 detentions. There's been, 24 deaths or killings. That's not something we had really when we first considered or reviewed this issue last week. There are threats to Edmundo Gonzalez. There's an investigation, a criminal investigation. There are apparently, you've heard about arrest warrants. these are things that happened in recent days that weren't present when we first considered this. So we need to, I think, our view is that some of this has to be included in the resolution. We'll see where the negotiation goes. These negotiations take a long time, and it's always a back and forth. But we think, and by we, I mean the United States, believes that that kind of reference, urging the international community to be seized by this, calling on Nicolás Maduro to stop this, I think it's a critical component of any future resolution.
Ambassador, I couldn't agree more, and that really forms a lot of the basis of the work, as you know, that we do here at the Atlantic Council, is doing our part to try to align where possible the international community and keep that focus on a Venezuelan-led process, which is to respect the will of the Venezuelan people and in this instance, of course, their votes and their votes in favor of Edmundo Gonzalez. Secretary of State Anthony Blinken recently joined UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres in expressing their quote readiness to support an inclusive Venezuelan-led process toward the reestablishment of democratic norms in coordination with our international partners, end quotes. I'd like to get your opinion on the importance of the UN Secretary General also weighing in, another obviously incredibly important, prominent multilateral body. But in addition, from your perspective, what would such a process look like? What would a inclusive Venezuelan-led process, what would be some of the contours of that from your perspective?
Well, first of all, I think that, as I said earlier, everybody should be involved in this. There should be multiple lines of effort that are working towards this common goal, common objective that we mentioned. Whether it's the OAS, whether it's the Secretary General of the United Nations, or the United Nations itself, or a dialogue by Mexico, Brazil, and Colombia, etc. I mean, everyone, the more that people are involved, I think the better in this. What we can't do, what we absolutely cannot do, Jason, is just get tired and move on to other things, right? We cannot, will not abandon the Venezuelan people in this, right?
And that's Ambassador, that's what Nicolás Maduro wants. He wants people, he wants to draw this out and just have people get tired and have the news cycle be overtaken by something else.
That's exactly right. And that's a thing we can't do. And so if we are able to adopt a resolution next week, that's not the first and last action or resolution that I think OAS should take. It depends on what happens on the ground, of course, in Venezuela. But if you recall, and you know this very well, Jason, in Guatemala, there were like 12 or 13 resolutions.
Yeah. And
no one can deny the fact that the OAS played an important role in ensuring that we got to January and a president, Arevalo. This is the same way. We just got to keep at it. And even if there's small steps, they're small steps. Very much guided by what happens on the ground. Now to your, I think, second part of the question, what is an inclusive, I think this has to be defined by the Venezuelan people and the internal processes that go on. Jason, that any process of transition requires an international, external, exogenous component, and that's what we're doing. But at the end, those tend to be secondary variables, right? The variable that really counts, the actors that really count are the internal actors. Those are the ones who really count in a process of transition with the support of all the international community.
Yeah. And
so, the effort that the democratic forces are doing in Venezuela have to be applauded. They are persistent. They understand, as you indicated, that the moment we just kind of get tired and go home or we don't pay attention, that's exactly, as you say, what Maduro wants. That's what he's banking on. And that's what happened in 2018, 2019,
that's
you will
right.
recall, right?
That's right.
So a sustained effort internally, but also internationally is required.
And Ambassador, thinking about that sustained effort internationally, and you were speaking beforehand about the importance of continuing pressure. What is that balance of pressure, but also support for negotiations, support for Venezuelan-led negotiations that you think regional countries should optimally aspire to?
I just think, Jason, that we should take our lead from the democratic forces in the country, the democratic opposition, right? That they are the key actors in this. I want to sort of applaud really the comments that were made yesterday. You may have seen them, Jason, by the Chilean president. I think they were right on the mark. And the more that presidents can speak and with the same clarity with which that President Boric did, I think is important. I think Maduro is counting on dividing us, the international community, creating fractures, etc. And we can't that. But I think the principal actors, the ones that will define that this inclusive, prosperous democracy, is the Venezuelan people, and I'd say particularly those who voted clearly in favor of democracy and clearly voted in favor of change, of an inclusive, prosperous rule of law, if you will, of Venezuela, which unfortunately is not the case today.
Yeah. And there have been some calls from some within the U.S. For the administration to take an even bolder stance, both in rhetoric and in action to these unfolding events. And as we've discussed, and as you've laid out, Ambassador, how events on the ground are frankly becoming more concerning by the day, the actions that Maduro is taking. What do you see as that balance? Of course, anything that happens in Venezuela has to be Venezuelan-led, has to be led by the democratic forces. But of course, the role of the U.S. international community is vital. What do you see as the response or the to those who say that the U.S. should be even bolder or should take action even quicker?
This always has a process in terms of diplomacy and negotiations. These aren't things that occur overnight. We want to be strategic in what we do. We don't want to do any counterproductive measures. I know people don't have patience. I understand why, because of the situation on the ground. But what we have to insist upon, Jason, is that we build more and more international support for what we're trying to do at the OAS and in other places, right? I think that's our key responsibility. We will have to respond to the human rights violations. The Inter-American Commission, for example, on human rights needs to do perhaps double its efforts. The UN Human Rights Council that will meet when they start their sessions next month will have to take this issue up as well, etc. And there are other bodies as well. But the key is to keep the diplomatic pressure going, right? Don't keep the foot to the pedal, so to speak, and not let go. We can't let go because that is what he's counting on. This is what Maduro is counting.
And in many ways, we mentioned the importance of making sure that the international community is not divided. And in many ways, we've seen great unity among countries across the region, even though the resolution didn't pass last week. But we've seen statements from all sides of the ideological spectrum, and to recognize the importance of accurate vote counting and to show the tally sheets and to make sure that ultimately the will of the Venezuelan people is respected.
Right.
So hopefully that, as we look at that and look at the future resolutions of the Organization of American States, that hopefully opens up a window to move things forward.
That's exactly right, Jason. That's exactly right.
Now, I want to ask you, Ambassador, we've rightfully spoken about the importance of human rights. And in the wake of the elections we've talked about, the Maduro government has intensified its repression against civilians protesting the results, as well as against opposition figures. You mentioned previously the investigation that's been opened on Maria Corina Machado and Edmundo Gonzalez following their refusal, rightfully so, to not acknowledge the government announced results. What other actions are you particularly concerned about that the government might take to solidify its position and quell dissent? What should we be thinking about? What should we be looking to be prepared for actions that that could be taken to, potentially, looking back at the history of Venezuela, looking back at the history in which Maduro has been able to control power? How might these next few weeks unfold, and what are you concerned about?
So you mentioned it. I think for me, I think the big concern is if in fact Maria Corina Machado and then Mundo Gonzalez are arrested and detained. I think that would be a step that could mobilize the international community even more, even those that might be somewhat sympathetic and don't want to rattle things too much in Venezuela. I think that would produce a reaction. And now I say we, the United States, I think will certainly within the OAS, take note of what happened, be very clear in our statements, probably perhaps, try to adopt another resolution that highlights this, that adds to the diplomatic pressure, at least from the side of the OAS. I think, this is just a personal view, I think that if Venezuela, if Maduro decided to do this, this will bring the international community in ways that he could not imagine. And his efforts to fracture and divide the international community, I think, would have failed wholeheartedly. And next, we've seen this sort of almost exponential growth in repression and detention of folks who are involved in the opposition or who were witnesses. If that continues to grow, I think that will only help what we're trying to do at the OAS and otherwise. So that is, at least in the short term, Jason, our biggest concern, right? That the arrest of these leaders, as well as sort of doubling down even more on the arrest and detention of folks who are just protesting, which is, what we've seen is that sometimes journalists are now because they're covering the protest, they're being arrested and detained. Venezuelans who are just walking and happen to come across an area that was protested, they've been picked up by the police.
Yeah.
I mean, we need to be calling attention to all this. We need to keep the pressure and light on all of these issues, and not just simply discard them or not give them as much importance because after all, they've done this before and this is just more of the same. No, not at all. We have to treat this as if it's the first time that they do it.
Yeah. And speaking about calling attention to, I think, and I want to remind the audience that we do have askac.org to submit your questions. So please feel free to do so. I think some have already figured out and already have a question that's come in. But Ambassador, I think insofar as keeping the spotlight, very important, the role of the U.S. Congress as well, right? We've seen a number of members of Congress, both Senate, House side, Republican and Democrat, come out and call attention, especially those who don't normally focus on Venezuela, to the importance of respecting the rights of the Venezuelan people, the will of the Venezuelan people, and also the repression of Maduro, including even a joint statement with European governments as well. And it seems to me like that's kind of all part of the broader process that you're talking about, and having more and more actors consistently keeping their focus on what's happening.
That's absolutely right. And the more we get those kinds of bipartisan, bicameral statements, I think just adds to the effort.
Now, Ambassador, there's a question that came in here that says that the U.S. is the U.S. has said it's working with Brazil and Colombia. Of course, President Biden, President Lula had a phone call recently to discuss what a potential transition could be. And the question here is, every day is critical. What would be the focus of the negotiation? Would it be about trying to get an international audit? And the person ends up by asking whether there is an exit road being contemplated, as the Economist has noted.
Is there an exit?
An exit road.
Exit road. So listen, first I want to make sure we it's important that we give that particular initiative, the Brazil, Colombia, Mexico initiative, the kind of space and opportunity to work and to find a way forward. And again, it's all part of the same effort. And so, I think we're supportive of that, and we certainly hope that some progress should be made, as long as the democratic forces and in Mundo, Maria Corina, and so on are at the table and are heard and are part of the negotiation. Very, very supportive of that. How that turns out, I don't want to get ahead of what are the different options that initiative or other initiatives, I should say, Jason, might come up with and that are acceptable to the different parties. And so I am not going to go into an exit road discussion or scenario and how that looks like. I'm going to let the parties sort of decide and get in front of that. So the last thing you want is the U.S. OAS ambassador to be commenting on exit roads.
But I think very important, as you're saying, that this is happening, that there is this discussion among these countries, and that there are different pathways being looked at insofar as how to move beyond the current situation. I want to ask you as well. There are likely people tuning in today, joining us from Venezuela. Of course, people in the Venezuelan diaspora, but hopefully also joining us in country as well. What is your message to them, and what is your message to them insofar as the role of the Organization of American States, and also your continued personal commitment, because I know your personal commitment to Venezuela is deep. It's long running, it's tireless. So I'd love to give you an opportunity to share your thoughts with those who are tuning in insofar as where you see things going, and your thoughts to those who are looking for further inspiration at a very difficult time, and inspiration from the U.S. and the international community.
So thank you for that, Jason, and thank you for the question and the opportunity. I've said this before, and I think it's definitely worth repeating. One, we will not abandon the Venezuelan people. We will not just simply say we're tired, we've got other things, we're distracted, let's find a way out of this that does not take into consideration the Venezuelan people and the democratic forces in Venezuela. We will not do that. The OAS, I can't speak for the OAS, but we, the U.S. OAS, will certainly remain seized by this issue. Two of the four pillars of the OAS, democracy and human rights.
Right.
If we're serious about those two pillars, if we're serious about the Inter-American Democratic Charter, we're serious about the commitments we member states made to human rights, then we have no other option than remain fully engaged in the Venezuelan situation, and to stay engaged and to ensure that and do everything we can to demonstrate that we are committed to helping the Venezuelan people in the ways that they voted on that election day. That's undeniable. The results are undeniable. And so we will not be distracted by any of this. And I sort of, on a personal level, I'm one of the reasons I got into this job is because democracy and human rights are increasingly at risk in the region. And I think this job that I have gives us an opportunity to recommit ourselves in serious ways. You've heard the President Biden and Secretary Blinken talk about how we need to double down on democracy. And that's exactly what we're doing here through the OAS. And we had a test case. That test case was Guatemala, Jason, right?
Yeah.
And that turned out okay. Well, we got another test case here. It's Venezuela. And we have to have the same approach to it.
Well, Ambassador, thank you very much. I think that's a great last comment to end this conversation. I want to again thank you for coming on. and for not only for coming on, but also for your personal commitment, what you're continuing to advance at the OAS, and so far as keeping that pressure from an international perspective, so that the voice of the Venezuelan people are heard and the voice of the Venezuelan people are respected, because that's what we're all working toward. So thank you so much, Ambassador, and look forward to having you on as things continue to develop at the OAS. Great insight to be able to share that further resolutions, further processes are in the works, because that kind of commitment to that steady drumbeat is absolutely vital.
Absolutely. No, thank you. And thank you for the opportunity. And you know, every time you call, I answer the phone and do whatever you want me to do.
Thank you so much, Ambassador. I want to turn over to Jeff Ramsey, our senior fellow for Venezuela, to provide some closing thoughts for us. Jeff?
Thanks, Jason, and I want to echo your thanks to Ambassador Mora. We at the Adrian Arch Latin America Center have been deeply committed to supporting a democratic solution in Venezuela that recognizes Venezuelans' fundamental right to elect their own leaders. Over the last year, we at ALAC have been working to bring together stakeholders from across the spectrum in the US and in Venezuela and across the international community to try to support a democratic process that is led by the Venezuelan people. I'll just mention that last month, in partnership with the Gordon Institute at Florida International University, we published a new policy memo looking at potential scenarios around the Venezuelan elections and the potential responses from the international community. This memo was informed by the work of our recently launched Venezuela Solutions Group, which is a multi-sectoral working group dedicated to advancing political agreements and securing a democratic opening in Venezuela. The Solutions Group recently convened in Washington to conduct a private scenario planning exercise. We will be watching the situation in Venezuela, the unfolding response from the international community very closely. As we just heard from Ambassador Mora, we know that it is imperative for Latin American and U.S. policymakers to stay closely attuned to the evolving situation on the ground. And we at the Atlantic Council and in our Venezuela Solutions Group will be focusing particularly on ways to align incentives to support a democratic opening, as well as ways to support regional coordination. So stay tuned. I want to thank you all for joining us. Thank you again, Ambassador Mora, and invite you all to follow the work of the Atlantic Council and our Venezuela Solutions Group moving forward.